Hello, this movie is for Trigonometry, Learning Target 3, 4, and 5. You will need a graphing calculator, and your calculator, check the mode, which is the button at the top. Do mode, it's the second row, top column, and you want to make sure you're in degree. If your calculator is in radians, you want to arrow to degree and then press enter. So that you want to make sure that your calculator is in the right degree, and then we'll get started. So trigonometry, trigonomic ratios. We know that sine, cosine, and tangent are ratios. And so when we have a right triangle like we see right here, we see that we've got two legs and we've got the hypotenuse. We also have two acute angles and we have a right angle. One thing that we know is that the side opposite the 90-degree angle is always the hypotenuse. If we're talking about angle A, and we're going to stand at angle A, then what we have is this side B is going to be the adjacent side. It's the side right next to us, helps form the angle where we are. Notice the hypotenuse is also adjacent to us, but because it's the hypotenuse, it's trumped by that. Side A is going to be the opposite side. So when we talk about the ratios of sides and we're standing at angle A, we have that the opposite side over the hypotenuse, so A over C, is the ratio of sine for angle A. Cosine of angle A is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, B over C. And the tangent ratio of angle A is the opposite over the adjacent. So that's A over B. Let's look at this. One shortcut to remember it is SOHCAHTOA. This helps you to remember that the sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So if you can remember SOHCAHTOA, that will help you remember the ratios. Let's put it into practice. So what are the sine, cosine, tangent ratios for angle T? That tells us we're going to stand at angle T. And if we're standing at T, then 8 is the opposite side, 15 is the adjacent side, and 17, well, it's the hypotenuse because it's opposite the right angle. So we put that the sine, it looks like sin, but we always say sine of T is the opposite over the hypotenuse. The cosine of T is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and the tangent of T is the opposite over the adjacent. So we have these ratios, 8 over 17, 15 over 17, and 8 over 15. And that's all it wants is the ratios. What we're going to look at now is down here, we're going to do the same but for angle G. So now we're standing at angle G. What changes? Well, the hypotenuse stays the same. Now 15 is the opposite and 8 is the adjacent. So when we look at the sine of angle G, it'll be the opposite, which is 15 over the hypotenuse, 17. The cosine of angle G, and you don't have to have the angle symbol, sorry about that. The cosine of G is going to be the adjacent, 8 over the hypotenuse, 17. And the tangent of G is going to be the opposite over the adjacent. So what do we notice here? Well, we notice that 8 over 17, we have that the cosine of G is equivalent to the sine of T. And you also notice that the cosine of T is equivalent to the sine of G. So we have this relationship that the sine of one acute angle is equivalent to the cosine of the other. Now the tangent of T, if you look at those, they're inverse. 8 over 15, 15 over 8. So that's an interesting relationship. But notice the trig ratios is just a ratio of sides, but it's really useful. Here we have the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The tower reopened, resulted in a tilt of 5 degrees, reduced from 5.5. So if someone drops an object at a height of 150, we get this right triangle, and I'm going to redraw it just so it's a little easier to analyze. We've got 5 degrees up here. This is 150, and what we're trying to figure out is how far from the base, x. So what angle we're going to stand at? We're going to stand at the angle that we're given. Let's label the side that we're given 150, which is adjacent, and label the side we want to find, the x, and that's the opposite. So then we ask ourselves, what trig function, sine, cosine, or tangent, uses opposite and adjacent? Well, if we go back up here, opposite and adjacent is tangent. So we're going to come back down here, and we use the tangent of the angle equals the ratio of sides, opposite, over adjacent. And we solve this equation. So it's a simple equation. Keep in mind, tangent of 5 stays together. You can't separate those, and we're going to multiply both sides by 150. So we're going to be typing in 150 times tangent of 5. So 150 times tangent of 5 equals 13.123. And that's about 13 feet. It's quite a ways away. Okay, let's go to the next page. Find the value of W. So we're going to stand at the angle that we're given, 54. W is the opposite side and 17 is the hypotenuse. So what trig function uses opposite and hypotenuse? Sine. So we do the sine of the angle equals the ratio of sides, opposite over hypotenuse. And to solve this then, we're going to multiply both sides by 17. So we get 17 times sine of 54. And that's because if I multiply this side by 17 and this side, the 17's cancel. And so I'm typing in 17 times sine of 54. You'll notice sine, cosine, and tangent have their own buttons on the calculator. And we get 13.753, nearest tenth, so 13.8. Make sure that you show what trig function you're using, the equation, and that's in green, as well as your answer. Let's go here. We're going to stand at the angle that we're given, which is the 28. We're going to label the side that we're given, which is the opposite side, and label the side that we want to find, which is the adjacent side. What trig function uses opposite and adjacent? Tangent. Tangent of the angle equals the ratio of sides. And tangent is TOA, which is opposite over adjacent, which is 1 over W. In this case, because we're solving for W and it's in the denominator, what we can do is put this over 1, and then we can cross multiply these two as if they are a proportion. So we get W times tangent of 28 equals 1. Now we're solving for W, so what we have to do next is divide by tangent of 28. Again, just solving the equation, and tangent of 28 can't be separated, so we're going to be typing in 1 divided by tangent of 28. So 1 divided by tangent of 28 gives me 1.880, so 1.9. Down here, we're going to stand at the 33-degree angle, label the side that we're given. Well, that's the hypotenuse. It's opposite the 90-degree angle. And the side we want to find, which is the adjacent side. So what trig function uses adjacent and hypotenuse? Cosine. Cosine of the angle measure is adjacent over hypotenuse. And so we're going to be solving for W, so we've got to multiply both sides by 4.5. So type in 4.5 times the cosine of 33. And that gives you 3.77 or 3.8. All right. Next, we're going to be finding an angle. So this one's a little bit different. So we're going to stand at the angle that we want to find and label the two sides that we're given. This is the hypotenuse and this is the opposite. What trig function uses opposite and hypotenuse? Sine. So the sine of the angle, well, the angle we don't know. So it's the sine of x is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, 6 over 10. And I know we could reduce that, but we're not going to. We're just going to leave it. It's fine. But we got to solve for x. And the way that you do that is you take the inverse sine of both sides. So that's sine to the -1. So inverse sine of 6/10. Now you'll see on your calculator, if you do second function sine, that you get the inverse sine. It's sine to the -1. And then you type in 6 divided by 10, and you get that x, the angle measure, is 36.86. We want to round to the nearest degree, so x is approximately 37 degrees. That's how you get an angle measure. You do the inverse. So let's see down here. We're going to stand at the angle measure that we want to find, which is x. And if we stand there, let's label the two sides we're given, the hypotenuse and the adjacent. And what trig function uses those two? Cosine. So cosine of x is equal to the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. So to solve for x, we got to take the inverse cosine of 15 over 20. So we do second function cosine, 15 divided by 20, and that gets us 41.4. So x is about 41 degrees. Let's see here. Pause the movie, try these two on your own, and then press play when you are finished. All right, we want to solve for y. So if we're standing there, this is the opposite, this is the adjacent. So we use tangent of y equals opposite over adjacent. And so y is the inverse tangent of 57 over 112. So second tangent 57 divided by 112 equals 26.9 degrees or 27 degrees. The measure of r, so if we're standing here, this is opposite, this is hypotenuse, so it's the sine of r equals 7 over 15. R is the inverse sine of 7 over 15. And so the inverse sine of 7 over 15 is 27.81, which is about 28 degrees. Hopefully you did well on those. And that's it for our trig lesson. Just keep in mind that your equation, sometimes like here, the variable's in the numerator and you just multiply by the number. Sometimes the variable you're solving for is in the denominator, in which case you got to cross multiply and then you'll end up dividing by the trig function. So let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.